This is very exciting. I actually taught myself, amazingly enough, to make 30-minute videos. So this will be a lot easier from now on. They'll be in chunks now. I'm trying to do World War II in 2 or 3 pieces, but that is the topic for this week. It is a new PowerPoint labeled, oddly enough, World War II, and pay particular attention in the beginning to those 3 or 4 slides of maps because I keep coming back to those. This is much harder to do on a tape than it is in class, but we'll do the best we can. Okay, so one of the first things to look at is the comparison between World War I and World War II. World War I is a little vague. How exactly did the world get into war? How exactly was Europe torn apart? For what reasons? And actually for no good reason in World War I. World War II, there's no question. There's no gray area. It's clear as a bell. You have homicidal lunatic in Germany connected with other people who are fascist in Italy and in Japan, and there's no question they have to be stopped because Hitler's purpose, of course, was to take over the world and create the Third Reich. This is a rise of fascism, which was a response to the Great Depression and to the effects of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, which was a total economic collapse. What is fascism? It is a dictatorship. It is totalitarian. The state controls everything. But it's also connected, it's a special variety of dictatorship. It's connected with nationalism, national pride, and military. So fascism is kind of a military nationalistic dictatorship in a way. The first one is not Hitler, it is Mussolini in Italy. Hitler follows shortly thereafter, and then in Spain you have Franco as well. Hitler becomes Führer in 1933, basically dictator. There were treaties, neutrality treaties, and in 1935, Hitler withdraws from the treaties and ignores the League of Nations as well. If you look at slides 6 to 8, one of the first slides you'll see, actually before you look at 6 to 8, look at one of the first slides and you'll see the map of Europe. You will see the Allied powers in one color and you will see the Axis powers in another. So that is Germany, Italy, and later on Japan, which of course is not on the map of Europe. You will see the neutral powers, always Switzerland is the neutral banker, some parts of Scandinavia, and Spain remains neutral. Why does Spain remain neutral? If you look at slides 6 to 8, Spain is devolving into a vicious, nasty civil war between Democrats and fascists. This war goes on for years and years. It was horrible. There are still scars from this in Spain today. There is still controversy over it. And if you look at the last slide, number 8, that is Pablo Picasso's famous painting, Guernica. What was Guernica? It was a small town in northern Spain, which was bombed with poison gas, which was illegal by neutrality treaties, and basically destroyed as well. This was done with the help of German armaments and German planes. They used Guernica basically as a test run for the war later. So Hitler became Führer in 1933, withdraws from the treaty in 1935. In 1936, if you look at another one of those first maps, you will see piece by piece Hitler chewing up Europe. In 1936, he invaded the piece of land between Germany and France, which was called the Rhineland along the Rhine River. Why? Because this had been given to France in the Treaty of Versailles. It had French nationals, it had German nationals. Germany invaded it and took it because he claimed there were German speakers there, German people there, and the response of the rest of Europe is leave it alone. This is called neutrality. This is called basically ignoring the problem. In the spring of 1938, Hitler invades Austria. Why? Austria was an independent country. What language does Austria speak? German. So Hitler invaded on the grounds that there were German ethnic people there, and again, Europe did nothing. In the fall of 38, After Austria, he invades the Sudetenland, again next to Germany, on the grounds that there were German speakers there. In the spring of 39, he invades Czechoslovakia, a completely independent country. What did the rest of Europe do? Nothing. Appeasement. You are trying to basically please Hitler, give him a peace, maybe he will leave us alone. Appeasement obviously didn't work. This has come up again and again since then. What do you do about invading forces? Do you confront them or do you let them go? And Hitler is the classic case of not letting them go too far. Finally, in the fall of 39, in September, Hitler invades Poland. Poland, again, an independent country after World War I, and Hitler made a separate pact, a secret treaty with Russia, that Germany and Russia would split Poland between them. And there was no grounds for that except absolutely invasion. At this point, the allies of Poland, it was clear Hitler wasn't going to stop, and the allies of Poland, Britain, and France declare war on Germany. Russia, of course, has a secret treaty. In the spring of 1940, Hitler invades Denmark and Norway. Sweden remained neutral. Norway is still pissed at the Swedes for this later on and allowed the Germans to use Sweden as a staging ground. They did not actively participate, but they were passive supporters of the Germans. Finland is also not very happy with the Swedes for this. In the next month, in May, Hitler invades Belgium and Holland. By June of 1940, Hitler, in a blitzkrieg, which means literally lightning war in German, Hitler has invaded France and is near Paris. In 6 weeks, France fell. France was put under German control, some of it with occupied military troops. The southern part of France, called Vichy France on the map, you can see was under political control of Germany, but not actually occupied by German troops, but they were collaborators. Many French immediately went underground. There was a resistance there and in many of the other countries of Eastern Europe to the Germans, but you could not resist openly or you were taken up against a wall and shot. So by July of 1940, Hitler controls all of Europe, all the way down into the Balkans, all the way up into Scandinavia. Who is left, the last man standing? England. And Hitler is massing troops in Western Europe to invade England. The thing that saved England, of course, is there's the English Channel. The other thing that saved England was the Royal Air Force. And there's a wonderful monument in London to the Royal Air Force. The famous quote underneath it is, "Never have so many owed so much to so few." When Hitler sent bombing runs over England, over London, he was met by the Royal Air Force and kept from destroying the country completely. Okay, so after he's massing troops in the front, Hitler made a very strategic error, and in the spring of 1941, he turns on Russia. He breaks the pact he had made with Russia. His goal, he is a crazy person, his goal is to invade Russia to conquer the world. If you look at slide 11, you can see what happened. If Hitler had been a historian, he would have known, don't invade Russia, particularly in the winter. Now, they didn't think they were going to be there in the winter. He invaded in the summer, and he figures he's going to be home by Christmas without any problem. Didn't happen that way. What happened was the same thing that happened to Napoleon, is the Russian winter basically annihilated Hitler. Let me get a different slide here. Okay. The Russians were left pretty much to fight Hitler on his own, and I'm spending some time on this because the book spends very little time and spends more time on the Western battles. Those you can cover yourself with the textbook. Russia begged the Allies, begged America and England to open a front in the West. And America and Britain decided, okay, this is not where we're going to make our battle. By the way, Russia is communist. We're not sure about those guys. Hitler's goal in getting Russia was to get the oil fields in southern Russia. If you look again at the map, how far did they get? They got up to Stalingrad and up to Leningrad. And at that point, Stalin, who was dictator of Russia at the time, said, we go no further. So they move very quickly, but the further they go, of course, the longer their supply line. And since this is a mechanized war, not a horse war, you had to bring your gasoline. Winter closed in. The Russians hadn't succeeded. And in Russia, the winter is, I've been in St. Petersburg in December. I don't recommend going in the winter at all. Winter gets to 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. If you spit, your spit will freeze before it hits the ground on days in Russia. Plus, you have lots and lots of snow. They had to build actually fires underneath the tank engines overnight so that the whole engine block wouldn't freeze overnight. The further east they go, the less fuel they have. Russia is a huge country. The Eastern Front is about 1,800 miles long. This is the largest military operation in world history. They used 10.5 million, 5 million Axis troops. Hitler sent 5 million troops to invade and conquer Russia. These are both dictators of different kinds. And Hitler underestimated the Russians. Unlike Hitler, Stalin, who was also nuts, was very pragmatic, learned from his mistakes, and as Hitler moved east, Stalin took all of his factories and kept moving them further east beyond the German lines. Unlike Hitler, who believed that women should be home having nice little blonde, blue-eyed babies, Stalin took all of his men, put them in the army, and had the factories run almost completely by women. So women in Russia were heavily involved in the war effort. He was not at all a chauvinist. Under terrible conditions, the Russians were making over 2,000 tanks a month versus 500 tanks a month by the Germans. Stalin's line, as you saw on the maps, no land, no surrender, no land beyond the Volga River, beyond Leningrad and Stalingrad. They had staggering losses. Unbelievable, not only of Russian army troops, but of civilians too, because as Hitler swept east and as winter closed in, Hitler took everything from the civilians along the way. He took food, he took clothing, he took livestock, he took stored wheat, he took everything. So people in that part of Russia basically starved that winter and into the next year. Germany had more firepower, more air power, but Russia refused to retreat. And there are absolutely amazing stories out of Russia. Stalingrad, which was named after Stalin, was under an 800-day siege. This is close to a 3-year siege. The bloodiest battle in, as far as we know, in world history. 250 German divisions, 3 million German troops were thrown on the Eastern Front, particularly at Stalingrad. This is 2/3 of the German army. There was nothing left in Western Europe for Germany to conquer. They sat there, and the Russians refused to retreat. Everybody in Stalingrad and Leningrad went underground. They lived in the subways. They lived in the basements. They endured bombardments. They endured starvation. Hitler also ordered no retreat. You have to take Stalingrad, cannot get you out. Could not get his supplies there. At the end of this siege, the German troops were surviving on 200 calories a day, which is basically a piece of white bread. The Russians finally encircled them. They begged to retreat. They were promised airdrops by the German army, which never came. And basically, the Russians destroyed most of the German army. They finally did retreat what was left of them, but most of them ended up as prisoners of war. There are amazing stories out of these sieges. When Russian troops ran out of hand grenades to throw at the German tanks, a Russian soldier would bury himself in the snow, wait till the tank came close or over him, and then pull a pin on a hand grenade, blow himself up as a suicide bomber. There are other stories, again, when they ran out of hand grenades and didn't even have that Russian troops would throw their bodies in the treads of the German tanks to stop them for Mother Russia. Again, suicide. They called in on a number of occasions. They called in their own bombers to bomb their own positions. Go ahead and bomb us. We don't care. You will kill the Germans as well. So there's all kinds of heroic stories about this. They refused. They were ordered not to retreat, and they did not retreat. The upshot was that that's as far as Russia got. Germany was not defeated by the Allies. Germany was defeated by the Russian winter. Germany was defeated in Russia. They refused to give up. Stalingrad, over 1 million Russians dead there just in that one city. Some idea of the casualty rate in Russia: 2 Russian divisions out of 13,000 men. In one, 105 survivors. Out of 10,000 men at the end of the war. In another Russian division, 320 survivors of the original group. Over 1 million Germans killed as well. 91,000 POWs were taken to Russian, basically concentration camps, prisoner camps. Only 6,000 ever returned alive to Germany. The Russians were not very happy with the Germans. Okay. America is not in the war for the first 2 years. Why? We remained a neutral country, just like World War I. Franklin Roosevelt is president. He is reelected for the 4th time he's reelected for the 3rd time, in 1940. We were not ready for war, and Franklin Roosevelt knew it. From Dr. New Deal, he becomes Dr. Win the War, and he becomes the main figure in World War II as well. The focus shifts from the New Deal and stopping the Depression into the war. Franklin knew he had to deal with people that were not friends of America. He had to deal with Spain. Again, if you go back to one of the maps, you will see that Spain controls the entrance to the Mediterranean. If you are going to attack Germany, whose ally is Italy, you're probably going to start with Italy. You don't attack the center point, the strongest point, which was the German heartland. You're going to attack the weakest point, which was definitely the Italians. So if you're going to get your troops into the Mediterranean, you have to deal with Spain. So Franklin, who hated Franco, dictator of Spain, who was a dictator and not a Democrat, basically couldn't do much to help the democratic movement in Spain, which is why the fascists won that battle. Franklin said, you can walk to the bridge with the devil as long as you don't cross it with him. So you have to play nice with Franco to keep Gibraltar, to keep the entrance to the Mediterranean open. You have to ignore Finland, which fought first the Germans and then the Russians after that, when the Russians invaded Finland and begged for American help. 40,000 Finns held off a 1 million-man Russian army for 4 months in the winter by themselves and begged for help from Roosevelt. But he couldn't do it. We have other things to do. This is a side issue. And the Finns basically were occupied by Russia till the end of the war. We had neutrality treaties. We had the memory of World War I, the horrible, horrible battles of World War I with the huge casualty rates. There again is a very large peace movement in the United States that wants nothing to do with getting into another war, which again is over there. We had a neutrality treaty. We could not send arms. We could not send military supplies to nations at war. We could not send money to nations to war. So we did cash and carry. Cash and carry meant you paid cash for what you wanted for non-military supplies. You carried it in your own ships, which avoided American ships getting blown up in the Atlantic. The other thing we didn't do, and this is one of the low points in American history, again, we had those quotas, nationality quotas from 1924. They were never changed in World War II, which is one of our least glorious moments in American history. So while millions of people are trying to get out of Europe, we never allowed them in, including number of boats who made it into New York Harbor in sight of the Statue of Liberty and were turned around and sent home. So we couldn't help, we couldn't break neutrality, we couldn't help nations. They could come and pay cash and carry non-military supplies. But later on, of course, we did use lend-lease to replace cash carry. We said we would lend Britain battleships. As somebody said, yeah, we're lending it like you lend somebody chewing gum. We knew we'd never get those ships back. But technically, we weren't selling them military supplies. So we would lend them what they needed, or we would lease it. We would rent it to them. And we started carrying our own supplies in our own ships. Franklin Roosevelt said the primary purpose of the United States is to avoid being drawn into war. We have got to avoid getting into war, at least until we are ready. A number of Americans went as volunteers, again, but America had no official presence for the first 2 years of the war. So why do we finally get into it? Look where Hitler is. There is nothing left but England. And Hitler is planning to take England and has a very good chance of doing it. Many Americans thought England would fall within 6 months. If he takes England, what's next? Because he is a homicidal lunatic and he will be coming across the Atlantic. So before we even got into the war, America moves into Iceland. Why Iceland? There's no strategic value there, except it is on the way to North America. You can't help the good guys, but we could occupy Iceland and help build bases in Iceland in case Hitler started across the Atlantic. Okay. Our basic battle plan, when we do get into the war, in the beginning of the third year of the war, Britain stands alone, basically. But once we joined, there was a joint American and British command, which was the Joint Allied Command. Our goal is, how do you defeat Germany? You move in from the perimeter. You start in North Africa, which was under German and Italian control, and then you move into southern Italy and move north through Italy to attack Germany head on. Finally, D-Day, the final invasion, was 1944. So remember, this war is going on in Europe for exactly a little bit over 4 years. Why didn't we help earlier? Both Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt are waiting to see, to some extent, what happens. Will the communists in Russia and the fascists in Germany destroy each other? That would be great. Churchill doesn't want to give any help to Russia. Franklin Roosevelt is hedging his bets. He's much more pragmatic. What if Germany wins? What if Russia wins? Then they will end up stronger. Our major goal is to destroy Germany. Germany is a bigger problem than Russia in the 1940s. So actually, Franklin Roosevelt, we do help the Russians. It's late, but we do help. We sent millions of dollars. We also sent a lot of equipment, not through the east because we couldn't get into Russia that way, but through Alaska, through the west coast of America. And they particularly were very happy to get equipment like trucks and particularly Jeeps. For some reason, they loved our Jeeps. They were very mechanically superior to what the Russians has. At the end of the war, Stalin said, without aid from America, the war would be lost. And he was probably right. We sent $11 billion. We did come up through Italy. The Italians have never forgotten the American invasion. Most Italians hated Mussolini as well. When we got into Italy, people came out on the streets and had parades. And when I was in Sicily a couple of summers ago, we were walking along in a group. We had an Italian guide explaining the history and some of the historical buildings, and a little old Italian man pulled his car over and stopped and said, "Americans." And we said, yes. And he stopped and talked to us in Italian with our guide translating to us. And he said, I remember the American invasion. I was a little boy. Chocolate bars. The American soldiers were famous for handing out candy to all the kids. And he said, I know lots of English in translation. And we said, oh, okay, tell us the English you know. Goddamn son of a bitch, get out of the way, which is what the American GIs were telling these little kids who are following them. So the Italians have been very fond of the Americans ever since because we liberated them from the Germans. I'm going to stop there because I'm almost out of time and talk about the Pacific Front and the war at home next time. Stay safe, everybody.